Hello and welcome to another episode of the Adobe Creative Suite podcast. My name is Terry White, and in this episode, once again, I'm going to address a user question from my Facebook fan page, and it is how to work with layers. What are layers? What are they for? What do you do with them? How are they different in each of the applications? So I'm going to tackle that topic. It's a big topic, but I'm going to tackle at least a major part of it in this video. So let's get started with where did layers come from. If for those of you who are old enough to remember, layers were introduced in Photoshop 3, not CS3, 3, back in the 90s. So we've had layers since then, and each of the products, or the vast majority of the Creative Suite products, now have layers, but in each product they may work a little differently. So let's take a look. I'm in InDesign CS5, and in InDesign, we've had layers since day one. However, in CS5, the way the layers work have changed. In other words, up until now, they've all worked the same way in every version of InDesign until CS5. CS5's layers actually work more like Illustrator's layers now. So I'm not even going to bring up Illustrator because just about everything I show you here will work exactly the same in Adobe Illustrator CS5. All right, so let's start with, I've got a document here on the page, and this document is built up of different pieces. There's some Photoshop 3D text here, or soon to be 3D text. There is some objects here that are locked together. There's some text down here. There's a big image in the background. And if I bring up my layers panel over here, all the layers are on a layer called, I should say, all the objects are on a layer called layer 1. So layer 1 is there by default, whether you do anything or not. I did not create that layer 1. The minute you open up a new InDesign document, InDesign always defaults to at least one layer. Now, from that point on, whether you use them or not, you have access to them to better organize your document. Now, since InDesign, Flash, Illustrator, all of those programs are object-based, you look at layers as a way of organizing those objects. So for example, let's take the big image in the background. Let's say that I want that big image to be on a layer called background because I don't want to disturb it. I want to lock it down. I want to always be able to put things on top of it. I don't want anything to sneak behind it because you won't see it. So I want to put that on its own layer. Well, I can come down here to the Create New Layer button, a little pad of paper that we're so familiar with in just about every panel we have. That little pad of paper is the ability to create a new layer. And when you create a new layer by default, it's always going to put that layer on top of the layer you were on, and most likely it's going to label it the next number, layer 2 in this case. But I can double click on that name and I could change it. I can say that this is going to be called my background layer. And I can click OK, and I can then pull that layer down below the layer 1. So now background, and note it has a red color. Anything that's on that layer will be associated with it in red. And it is now below the stacking order, meaning it's at the bottom of everything. But there's nothing on it. So if I turn that layer off, turn it on, nothing happens because there's nothing on that layer right now. I just created an empty layer. Now you'll also notice that I have the background image selected, and it's got the little handles around it that I could resize or recrop this image using the frame that it's in. And those handles are blue. You might notice that. And they're blue because they're on layer 1, which is also blue. So they're color coded to let you know at a glance which object is on which layer. So what I'd love to do is take that background image and move it to the background layer. And all I have to do is grab its little icon over here. This little square indicates that that's the object I have selected, and I just drag it down to the background layer. And notice it even changed to red. And notice the bounding box has now changed to red to indicate that it's on the background layer. And if I turn off the background layer, it goes away. If I turn the background layer on, it comes back. So I've assigned that object to the background layer. I could also lock the background layer. That's what this little empty box is for. So just by clicking in that box, I've now locked that layer, and that means that I can move other things, but I can't accidentally grab that background and do anything with it because the layer is locked. So by the way, if you're ever having a problem where something all of a sudden doesn't move, doesn't let you select it, doesn't let you do anything with it, the first thing I always check is to make sure it's not locked. And in this case, the background layer is locked, and therefore it will not let me move anything or do anything to that layer. Also won't even let me put any new things on that layer because I've locked that layer down to where it won't let me do anything. And just clicking again will unlock it, and now that layer is accessible. Okay, so we've learned how to create new layers just by simply clicking the new layer icon. You can have as many layers as you want, and the layers are document wide. So if I go to page 2, I'm going to have a layer 1 and a background. If I go to page 102, I'm going to have a layer 1 and a background. Those layers are always throughout the entire document. So when you turn a layer off, you're turning the background off on all the pages, and everything that's on that layer on every page. And when you turn a layer on, you're turning it on for all the pages. Now, everything I said up to this point is exactly how it worked in every version of InDesign up till now. So everything I just said, if you're on InDesign CS4, CS3, InDesign 1, whatever it is, everything I just said is true. However, at this point is where it becomes different for CS5. So from everything I say from this point on, only works the way it works in CS5. So you notice that the layers now have these little triangles in front of them. These little triangles are like Illustrator's little triangles. So when I twirl this down for layer 1, it shows me all the objects on layer 1. So now, for the first time, InDesign has object by object layer control. So I could turn off a single object on a layer without having to turn the entire layer off. That is new in CS5, does not work that way in any previous version of InDesign. In any previous version of InDesign, it was all or nothing. Now you have individual control over the objects on a layer. You have individual control over locking a specific object on a layer. So I can lock just that right bar, but everything else on these layers is accessible without me having to lock or unlock those individual objects. So you get the idea, more control, and you even have individual stacking order in the objects themselves. Now, there's a bonus to this. What else does this allow you to do? It allows you to select an object that may be buried deep among other objects or underneath other objects by just clicking its little square. So I could select that bar without me having to click through or find it in my layout just by going to the layer. So that's another advantage that we have working with layers like this inside of InDesign or Illustrator. So now, let me show you one more thing, one more reason why you might want to work with layers. Let me create one more layer. I'm going to create a layer called Notes. And in my Notes layer, before I click OK, I just double-clicked on it to name it, and then I titled it Notes. It's going to have a green color. I can set the color to whatever I want. But you notice that there is one area down here I haven't talked about yet. And this area allows you to control what you see on an individual layer or what that layer can and can't do. And one of the things I love about this is on my notes layer, I might leave notes to my editor or notes to another person that's going to work on this document. And what I would never want to happen by accident is for those notes to print. Meaning if I left a note right on the page, I don't want that note to print when you print the page. So I could turn off printing for a particular layer. So now anything I put on the notes layer will show on the document. It'll always be there on screen, but whenever you print this document, that layer will never print. So if I go here and I'm on the notes layer and I go ahead and drag out a new frame, notice it's green, and I can say change this image for the next issue. And let's go ahead and select that, and let's make that nice and large using Command Shift greater than or PC Control Shift greater than. And I can now stick that anywhere I want in my document, and I never have to worry about that layer accidentally printing, because that layer can't print. So whatever I put on that layer, it will not print. So that's a quick look at how object-based layers work. So again, this is the way it would work in Illustrator, the way it works in InDesign. Object layers are like that in Flash. They're in Flash Catalyst. They're in all of our other products except one. Photoshop layers do work differently because they're pixel-based. So everything I just talked about is pretty much all the other products across the board, with little caveats here and there about features that a layer can and can't do. But the concept is the same across the board, whether it's Acrobat, Flash, Illustrator, InDesign. All the object-based programs work very similarly. Photoshop is different. Let me show you why. All right, so let's do a quick composite here in Photoshop. I'm going to start off in Bridge. I've got 3 images that I'd love to put together as one image. So I'm just going to go ahead and open those images up. And I've got these images open. They're camera raw images, so they're going to open in raw first. And that's cool because I can get to do some non-destructive adjustments first. So this first image, I want to crop a little bit here. And again, because I'm doing it in camera raw, I can always come back and uncrop it. I'm just cropping it down a bit so it kind of matches the other two. I had a little bit more headroom in that image than I had in the other ones. Okay, so now I'm done with my adjustments. So I want to select the other two. And I'm just going to go ahead and open all 3. So now all 3 images opened in Photoshop. And if they had been JPEGs, they just would have opened without that extra camera raw step. So you get the idea. I've got 3 images open now, and they open in CS5 because I've got the application frame on into 3 different tabs. I like the application frame, by the way. I know some people don't, but I actually like it. So what do I want to do? I want to put these 3 images together, and I want to use this image as my foundation, my base image. So I want to put this image on the right of it, this image on the left of it, but I need room to do that. There's no extra room over here or over here on the image. So the first thing I need to do is go adjust my canvas size. And my canvas size, when I bring it up, tells me how much space the canvas is currently taking. But I'm going to estimate that I need about 3 times the space, since I'm going to put 3 images together. I know I don't need that much because I've done this before. But just to start off with, I'm going to say instead of 11.8, give me about 30 inches wide. So we'll say OK, and because I've got this box in the center, it will add the extra space on the left and right using the background color. All right, so we'll click OK, and it did exactly that. So I've got now one big image with some white space on the left and right side of it. Now I have room to add the other 2 images, and it doesn't matter which one I add first, so I can take the one that's going to go on the right. And you're saying, well, how are you going to get that over there? How does that work? And this is one of the things that people kind of miss or don't understand about the application frame and working in tabs. This is probably why they don't like it, because they don't know how to drag from one to the other. So I'm going to start using the move tools and dragging this image. And I'm just going to drag it up to the image tab for the one that I want to move it into. But I can't let go yet. I have to drag it down into the image first, then I can let go. Then I can position it where I want it to be. And the hard part is I can't tell where to go. Like, where should this arm stop before it runs into the arm on the other image? Well, because now it's on a layer, which happened automatically the minute I drug it over, I can temporarily lower the opacity of that layer so that I can see it as I'm moving it. I can get it as close as I want it to be. I can overlap it if I wanted it. But I can get it where I want it to be and see it, and up and down as well, and get the height right, because I don't want her to be any taller in one image than she is in the other. And then I can lower the opacity back. Now, this is what I meant by I didn't really need it to be as wide as I originally estimated, because I don't need it to be as wide. So I'm going to crop that in a moment. But now let's go ahead and get the other image. Let's grab this one. Same thing. Start dragging it with the move tool. Drag it up to the tab for the other image. Drag it down into the image, then you can let go once you get it in here. Same thing, where do I want it? Lower the opacity. Oops, I don't want it touching her yet. So right about there is where I want it. And here's the problem with this one image. Because they are 3 separate images, this one I may have stood back a little further than the other 2, so she's a little smaller. Her head's a little smaller than her head in the other 2 images. So I'm going to grab the free transform, Command T on the Mac, Control T on Windows, and just scale it up a little. I know you're like, oh no, you're losing resolution. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I'm okay with that. All right, so now let's get it right about where I want it. Maybe right about there. I may have scaled it up just a little bigger than I wanted it to be. Right there, and let's go ahead and move that up. Okay, so I would spend more time getting the size and everything just right, but for this quick video, I'm just going to go ahead and lock it down. So we'll just say, okay, that's where I want it. And again, I can raise the opacity back up. So now I've got 3 images together. I know I need to crop. I can crop at any point. I don't have to do it now. I could do it at the end. I could do it now. I could do it anywhere in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and do it now just because it's bothering me. And let's go ahead and crop this down. And of course, I wouldn't crop it down unless I was absolutely sure that that's where I wanted that right image to be. So I'm pretty much locked in now. But I still have my 3 layers. So I have a layer I can turn on and off, just like we did in InDesign. And now this is where the layers become different as opposed to InDesign. Because these are pixels, I now have the ability to adjust or paint the pixels that are on the image. So for example, what I want to do is, and by the way, I always recommend you do this. I don't always do it, but I always recommend you do it. I know that that's the right image because I can see it's on the right. I know that's the left image because I can see it on the left, but we need to really start naming our layers because you could end up with 10, 15, 20, 100, or if you're Burt Monroy, 500,000, 750,000 layers. So you kind of want them named. So let's go ahead and name this. We're going to make this the right image, and you can call them whatever you want, but right and left is all I need for right now. We'll make that one the left one. That way, at a glance, at the layer name, I can know which one's which. So let's start with the right image. And again, all I did was double click to name them. On the right image, we're going to go ahead and we're going to add something called a layer mask. Add a layer mask. Now, adding the layer mask, what that will allow me to do, I could just grab an eraser and just start erasing that background. But that's permanent, meaning I erase too much and I don't see it and I save it, it's gone forever. But if I add a mask, I can hide it without actually deleting it. So now I've added a mask and now I can grab my paintbrush. As long as I'm painting in black, I'm masking. If I'm painting in white, I'm unmasking. And we'll go ahead and grab my Wacom pen here because I require that. And now, because I'm painting in black, I'm unmasking or hiding the image on top so I can see the image below. You get the idea? Not rocket science. Okay, so there we are. And again, sometimes I, miss a spot or whatever, and because I've got a mask, I can catch it and go back and do it later. Now, I don't know how easy or hard it is to see in the video, but these 2 edges don't really blend in too well. We're going to fix that later. But just to give you an idea, we're just going to go ahead and continue masking until we can see the image below. I don't need to go any further in. I could. I don't have to. But if I go too far, I'm going to start seeing that other edge. So this is what I meant by masking versus unmasking. Had that been erased, I'd have to undo the whole thing, but now I can just switch to white as my foreground color and just bring that right back. So that's why we mask versus unmasking. All right, so now that image is ready to go. So let's go to the left one. Same thing. We're going to add a layer mask. We're going to mask in black, and we're just going to do the same thing. Mask around the hand, so that we can bring back in the other image. I don't need to do any more. I mean, I can do this just to get rid of that hard edge, but that's pretty much it. So now we just need to worry about the edges themselves that don't blend into the background seamlessly as I did in my final composite, which is on my website. All right, so now how did I do that? Well, I'm a fan of letting the computer do as much of the work as possible. I mean, I could sit there and try and clone it and do all kinds of blurring and smudging and all kinds of things to get it to do it. But if the computer can do it for me, by all means, go ahead. That's why I bought a computer. So in this case, the computer can do a pretty good job of blending edges in for me, and if I use the right tricks. So here's what I want to do. I can't really effectively do this trick while they're on separate layers because I need them to be one flat image to blend it easily. But I don't want to lock it down yet. I don't want to compress all my layers back down to one solid background in case I need to make more changes later. So here's a trick that I do with layers a lot when I want to keep the layers but still have one layer for the whole picture. Select all three. And the keyboard shortcut for this on the Mac is Command Option. On PC it would be Control Alt. So Command Option Shift on the Mac. Control Alt Shift on the PC. And the letter E is in Edward. That will make a composite of the three layers onto its own new layer. So I can call that new layer Composite. And I left off the E. There we go. Composite. So now I've got a composite layer that has nothing to do with the other three. And again, because they're exactly the same, it looks the same when I turn it on and off. So at this point, I can turn off the other three layers because now I'm working on my new composite. And what I'm going to do with my new composite is we're going to grab the patch tool. And this is my trick for blending in edges. A lot of the time it works perfectly. I'm just going to select where these two edges don't look good together. In other words, where one was overlapping the other. And all I need to do is have a spot in my photo that is seamless. So the background over here on this photo is seamless. Now it looks like it's going to copy the color, but the patch tool does a really good job most of the time of using the pattern to blend as opposed to bringing over the color. And it did that beautifully in this case. So same thing here where the two colors, I know you might not even notice it on the video, but I'm seeing it. Don't really blend in together. I'm just going to drag it into an area that is solid, and it will do a very nice job of blending those two edges together seamlessly to where it looks like one continuous background across the back. And in this case, I'd probably do it one or two more times to get it just right, but you get the idea. There we are. So now I've got yet another layer, and this layer is one composite layer that I can now do whatever I want with as a single photo. So let's add one more kind of layer. All of these layers are pixel based. We're going to add a vector layer. So I have an action, by the way, that simply adds my watermark. It just adds the Terry White Photography at the bottom here. And all I did was type it once as I was recording it as an action. And the right font, right size, and now I can use that action anytime I want to type it without having to do it manually. However, it did make it a little smaller than I use it. So Command T or Control T on Windows for free transform will make that layer just a little bit bigger, and hit Return or Enter to lock it in. And I also lower the opacity of that layer. I don't want it to stand out more than the people that I'm photographing. And I would maybe bring that layer over just a bit right there, and you get the idea. So now that's a layer all by itself with its own controls, and and it's got its own opacity, and it's got its own ability to lock. So the same kinds of things you were doing with layers in InDesign, we're now doing those things as layers in Photoshop, but with the caveat that Photoshop layers are pixel based. So the layers themselves can have attributes or things that you don't have in the other. So I'm going to give you one last tip on layers. I'm going to give you a different kind of layer than what we worked with before. In CS4, CS5, we have adjustment layers that are from the adjustment panel. We've had adjustment layers even prior to that in previous versions, but now it's so much easier with the adjustments panel. So I'm going to go to my composite layer. And I'm going to go to my adjustments panel, and I want to add a black and white adjustment. So, by the way, we have presets. So if you go to the preset, I know I want the maximum white preset. Or I could just click the black and white and then do my own adjustments. But if I do maximum white, that will give me the preset I want and the adjustments to continue making. Which, by the way, another tip, you get the scrubby slider. If you wanted to adjust any particular color for that black and white, you can just drag on that color in the actual image, and notice it's adjusting the reds in the slider on the adjustment panel because I must have tapped on something in the image that was somewhat red. If I go here in the jacket, it's doing the yellows now because that jacket had a lot of yellow in it. So there you go. Now if we go to our layers panel, there's my adjustment layer. And my adjustment layer can be turned on and off. And more importantly, the opacity of that adjustment can be lowered to bring back in some of the color to kind of give it a tint, kind of give it that antique look. You get the idea, your creativity, you go from here, do all the things you want to do. But I hope you've learned a little bit more about what you can do with layers in each of the Creative Suite products. And again, for the most part, they're all object-based layers except Photoshop, where you have object and pixel-based layers and adjustment layers and filter layers and all kinds of things going on in Photoshop. So once again, thank you. My name is Terry White. Hope you enjoyed this.